Quote, "This is all behind us now. We can lick our wounds. We haven't been through anything like this because we've been the winningest program in America for many years." That's Kelvin Sampson after falling 3 straight times for the first time since 2017.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs Daily Podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. Making Locked On Coogs your first listen each and every day on Locked On Sports Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. Today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel. We got more on that fun getting to NBA Finals later. But if you want to join the comments, tell us something down below. Maybe you end up with the Rockets. Maybe it's better basketball news because Houston loses 3 in a row. We're going to talk some about that today. Can I digest after a little bit of time to breathe, licking our wounds, comparing this to last year, maybe kind of sort of. It might make sense when we get there. And also, I think a big takeaway is that there's a couple guys that might need to see the floor more, including one Mercy Miller. That's the third segment. But first, the quote from Sampson after the game was, "This is all behind us now. We lick our wounds. We haven't been through anything like this because we've been the winningest program in America for many years. This is a great life lesson for everybody. When you play good teams, you got to be on top of your game, and we weren't." And I think that's honestly that last part, you've got to be on top of your game, and we weren't, is the part people are sticking with a lot in digesting this 3-game losing streak. But I think what's interesting is the way he talks about it in the first half of what he has to say here, actually, about having been through anything like this. We have to lick our wounds. It's all behind us now, moving forward, right? It's a much more progressive. And that, admittedly, is probably because, unlike Iowa State and kind of unlike Arizona too, the third loss in this triumvirate on Monday night to Kansas was not it wasn't close, right? There was time to digest it as it was happening. It was unraveling in front of us. I guess it got cut to like 10 or so, somewhat late, but it was still out of reach for most of the end of the game. And I think that the perspective there was an interesting one to hear. Now, I also think another thing he said was telling. And I think another thing he said that has not quite gotten the same kind of run as "we lick our wounds" or "you got to be on top of your game," and we weren't. Another thing that's I think needs the same kind of gravitas is that he said that they, quote, "just ran out of steam." The full extension was, at the end, "It's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination. Take these opportunities to help us in March and get better. I don't know if anybody had to play games like this tonight. I had to play 3 games like this. Tonight, we just ran out of steam." And that kind of talks to the accumulation of these games over the course of a week. I'm going from Big Monday to Saturday primetime to Big Monday with 3 top caliber teams, 2 of which were in the top 10 and all of that. And we can talk about roster construction, who's available and who's not, and how Kansas without Darren Peterson might be one thing or maybe another. That seems all for naught right now because they all beat you, right? And I don't know I don't. People have been like, "Well, Parker, they lost to Arizona without Cole Pete." Da, 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 da. Like, okay, we also lost to Texas Tech last year without JT Toppin and ended up being a pretty good basketball team. Sometimes teams without a guy can make your scouting report wonky, or Anthony DeLoreso can get hot and he gets 22 points, or perhaps more importantly, it's more about what you're not doing anyway. It doesn't necessarily matter who the other guys are if it's more about what you're not doing. And I think that the interesting thing to me from Kelvin is this thought about pushing forward with progress. The national conversation about Houston is much more about, 3 times in a row. It's 10 minutes in 2017. They haven't lost 3 games in a row since January 2017. Looked up, the number one song back then was Black Beatles, that's according to Billboard. So if that's any indication of how long ago things were, yeah, talk about that. It just look, I think that the exhaustion of this and the using this as a teaching moment is what, Sampson identifying it and understanding that that's where to go from here, I think makes him such a great coach. Makes him a guy I think should be inducted in the Hall of Fame in April as a finalist. Right, he is a finalist, but I think he should be inducted in April because of that, because of things like that. Right, and I think you gotta see it, frankly, when you look at just things like a shot chart. I referenced this in the post game on the Kansas game itself, but the shot charts for Houston have kind of become staggering. There's so few shots inside of about 7 foot. So, in looking at the Kansas shot chart for Houston, Houston had just 7 makes inside of 7 feet from the rim. That's really not a lot. And I want to stress that that's not a lot. And that's actually the most they had in any of these 3 games. They had just 4 of those kinds of makes against Arizona and just 5 against Iowa State. And if anything, it looks like to me like there was some intention, like, hey, let's attack the rim more because you had almost twice as many of those kinds of makes against Kansas as you did against Arizona. And while both teams had big, strong rim protectors, it does feel like that was an intentionality. I mean, Cenac and the nice up and under. There was a couple from Kingston on the break, and maybe really those made the entire difference, right? But this feels like when you look at things like shooting percentage or pace of play, Houston got run out a lot in the Kansas game, but the shooting percentage and across the 3 games was they shot 42% against Iowa State from the field, which is not great. But compared to the 36% from the field against Arizona or the 32% against Kansas, I think it's fair to say that I would have taken 42 against anyone else, right? And those percentages dropping, the shift in that indicates more exhaustion and more tired. And that post game, Samson is going to give him 2 days off, and it's not uncommon for the folks who are like, "What, 2 days off?" It's not uncommon for them to have 2 days off of official organized activities at this point in the year. They did it last year around this time too, where you have like all these tournaments coming up and you have cut off games, and you know unorganized activity still happens. So guys will still get in there and get treatments and on the shooting gun and in the film room with video guys and things will, it's just an organized kind of way, won't be happening as much. And I think that that is all really telling because I felt like, frankly, watching them play against Arizona over the weekend, they looked exhausted then. And if you're exhausted against Arizona at home with a top XYZ crowd on a Saturday, there's no chance in Fall Gallon on a Monday. And that's kind of how the Fall Gallon game against Kansas played out. Now, I would also stretch that these teams Houston has played have had challenging schedules. Like Iowa State beat Kansas in the week prior to playing Houston, but also lost to TCU. And right after playing Houston, lost to a Richie Saunders-less BYU team. You know, teams take these losses in this Big 12 schedule without having the same kind of gauntlet as Houston. Arizona, sure, beat BYU, and then Houston but then barely beat Baylor a couple days later, lost to Tech and Kansas without Peterson before that. Before all of that happened, Kansas had lost 2 of the previous 3 games before beating Houston, including just 48 hours before against a Cincinnati team. And so Houston's stretch, while it was a fun test of the season to look at before it happened, during it happened, and disappointing after it happened, I do think that the way that this clumping of the schedule worked together for Houston is unlike things you're seeing across the rest of the conference. Not to say there aren't other challenging Big 12 schedules. It's the best league in America. And again, I really think it's the second best basketball league in the world right now. When you factor in lottery picks and future NBA guys and G League guys, like all those kinds of things. But this clumped schedule, I can't figure out was because they're trying to get Houston on TV in a post Super Bowl, pre March Madness kind of a way. If you're trying to take advantage of TV windows and what have you, or use the Saturday of All Star Weekend or jump off points or whatever. But it does feel like Houston's got this stretch here that was just different than everyone else. And we all know it's hard to be Houston Cougar. I don't mean to say that we want it any other way. I do think, though, that that was visible on Monday night. Now, does that excuse the 17-4 run on the previous Monday night against Iowa State? Probably not. Does that excuse some of the lackluster execution against Arizona and the turnovers? And probably not, right? But ultimately, I think that it does play a role over the course of this whole thing. And the candidness with which Sampson talked about it, I thought was fascinating. Now, That's not the only thing to take away from this. We've been kind of comparing this team to last year's team throughout the season, and I think we talked about it before the Gauntlet. That was 3 games, and they've lost all 3. I kinda wanna talk about where this team fits in comparison to that last year's as well. Before we get too far, today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel, because if you've ever wanted to go to the NBA Finals, live and in person, FanDuel is giving you a chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works: you should profit boost on any NBA future. You're going to be automatically entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, the entire experience. If you've been looking at the board, been like, hey, how can I get ahead on this futures thing? I like this team, like that team. Now is the time to do it, because it can actually get you a chance to win a trip to the finals in person. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play again with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And today's show is also brought to you by our buddies over at TurboTax, because tax season does not have to take over your life this year. TurboTax is making it easier than ever. Just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If your TurboTax expert did not file for you last year, just file by February 28th, which is coming up. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. And throughout this whole season, we've been kind of comparing this year's team to last year's team. Last year's team was 60 seconds away from a national championship. Got so close and returned 3 starters this year. Brought in this top tier class. It felt like a chance to right that wrong. And at different points, it's kind of been a bit back and forth about where this team compared to last year's team, right? And I have stressed, and I will continue to stress, an under discussed part of last year's team was how much better they got week to week to week. Last year's team was not a team that was playing for a national championship in January or February, or frankly, even March. They just got better every week. That's playing with guys like 6-year senior Jawan Roberts, LJ Cryer's an All American, all of those pieces that are, right, both here and not here anymore, had a big role in that, and they got better every single week. Now, this year, Houston is in the latter part of February and losing 3 games in 9 days. And in 9 days, you played number 13 Arizona. Last year, you played a stretch similar to this in 9 days. This year was about a week. Last year, your stretch had number 13 Arizona at Arizona State. So that's 2 road games. Home versus number 8 Iowa State, and at number 10 Texas Tech. That was a 9-day stretch. It's about the closest comparison I could find to the present one we're sitting in. And obviously, last year's team went 4-0 in that stretch. That was the Texas Tech game on the road that they won. Last year, they lost the home game to Tech earlier in the season. And look, to be fair to Houston last year versus this year, and making this comparison, I want to make sure we have a couple things lined out. One, Arizona State was not very good last year. I actually don't recall if they were full strength or not. Quaintance just played 13 minutes. So, Jane Quaintance and all that. Iowa State, who Houston played in this stretch last year, was certainly not full strength. They were missing 2 guards presently in the NBA in Curtis Jones and Keyshawn Gilbert. Texas Tech, who Houston played at the end of this stretch last year, was also notably not healthy. They played just 6 bodies. They were missing Darian Williams and Chance McMillan, who played really big roles in the Tech upset win over Houston earlier in the season. And so while they played a healthy Arizona team on the road to start that stretch, they didn't quite they didn't play a full strength top tier team in the same kind of way as what Houston just saw in Iowa State and Kansas, certainly. And while Arizona was missing a guy, a really important guy at that, they clearly have other talented basketball players they're doing very well with, and are very competitive with that. Frankly, we can look at like last year's game where Houston lost to Tech without JT Toppin and see how like sometimes having a lesser known quantity or not completely having the full scouting report because the team looks different can throw off what you're doing to prepare, right? That's not to say this year's team is better after going 0-3 in this stretch versus going 4-0 in that stretch from a year ago, right? This year you played uh, on the road at Iowa State, home against Arizona, and then on the road at Kansas, and how that compares to last year. But I'm trying to grade it. I think there are more comparable stretches and frankly more comparable performances because of some of those close games against beat up teams. I also think it's probably worth pointing out I kind of think the 2025 team would have won at least one of these 3 games this year. I think they probably would have been steady enough to fight off the comeback against Iowa State earlier in the season or a week ago at this point because you did have the 10-point lead with a few minutes left. I think they probably would have fought off the Iowa State comeback. I do think someone to kind of steady the hand early in the game against Arizona on Saturday, whether it's Juwan Roberts, LJ Cryer, getting something would have worked out better in that sense too, because they did have those steady hands and those upper class veterans that would, could get you an easy, unscripted basket, throw the ball in the paint, or get Cryer coming downhill or whatever, right? Now, admittedly, I also know that the Texas Tech loss at home on last year's team's resume kind of throws off this idea to me about like could they have beaten this year's Arizona team without Pete if they didn't beat last year's healthy Tech team without Toppin because of the ejection or whatever. Like all those things come into play, right? Because last year's team again did grow. They played that stretch in January that we're talking about here, and they grew and grew and grew and grew. This year's team is, not necessarily in the exact same spot. They also have a lot of growing to do. I don't think either team, though, and this one coming around to, I don't think last year's 2025 team or this year's 2026 team, if given the stretch that just happened, would have beat Kansas on Monday, given the legs, the exhaustion, the travel, the everything, the fact that no one beats Kansas at home on Big Monday, like all those things I think would have gotten in the way. I just think last year's team might have won 1 or 2 of the other games. And look, last year's team got better every single week. This year's team, I think the bigger problem is like there's some aspects that feel like more like a regression, especially in terms of the offense. And frankly, in looking at wins and losses, Kingston's raw numbers, Kingston's limits point guard is kind of the only guy where they kind of line up and don't drop off dramatically. And even his last 5 games, he's shooting 32%. The previous 6 games in Big 12 play, he was shooting 52%. So you've seen him kind of fall off a little bit in terms of what he's making. The biggest difference I can tell is his shot charge distance on shots are further and further away, hinting at a lot more pull-up jumpers, which is hinting at a lot of guys sliding over the gap and keeping them out of driving lanes and rotations. And and maybe he needs to punish them with the pass more than the pull-up jump shot. That again is part of his growth as a player and this team's growth as a team. It's hard to say that though when you got guys going like 1 of 8 from 3 and 1 of 9 from 3. It's like, well, who's he gonna kick it to, right? So those kinds of things I think are not necessarily as easy a decision. I think another key difference though in this last 3-game losing stretch is Houston's turnover battle has not fared them very well, and that's such a key part of, holding on to the basketball, possessing the basketball, having long possessions is a key aspect of what Houston Cougar basketball is all about. Uh, Now, I think that saying this team's regressed some is the easy way to go about it. And I think that there are some parts of the offense that feel like they have taken a slight step back. And I don't know that I would go as far as the defense. I think defenses continues to make 4 or 5 plays where, hey, you got a couple freshmen on the floor, and that means a mistake in rotation. They've kind of just done that all year. I know there's actually been a regression as much as it's just more magnified in these games against top tier opponents, right? But I also, and I don't want to get out without mentioning, last year's team got better and better and better and got to the national championship game. Again, we opened the segment with 60 seconds away from winning the whole thing, right? And this year's team has lost 3 in a row. People say, "Oh, that's over. We're done. Sweet 16 would be great." Right? People are upset. People are flipping out. Whatever. 2023, the Final Four was in Houston, and Houston was a 1 seed. And before Sasser got hurt, people were hoping Houston was going to play in it, and there was all this talk about who's going to win the national title that year. And it was kind of a little bit more open race, frankly, especially once Sasser got hurt. That was the year Miami got to the Final Four and all that, right? Um, National championship that year, UConn won the whole thing, and UConn lost 3 consecutive conference games in January of that season as well to a number 25 Marquette and an unranked St. John's and an unranked Seton Hall. And it was January, so albeit they had more time, but they took those 3 losses, got better, got a little healthier, got things fixed, and they went on to win a national championship. 2022, the year prior, Kansas lost a couple games in a span of a week to Baylor, who was in the top 10, but then also an unranked TCU. Then they barely beat the same TCU team 2 days later. That was a weird, like, tiebreaker kind of situation. And then they barely beat maybe it's a makeup game. Then they barely beat a top 20 Texas team in overtime at home, right? So Kansas had that rough stretch at the end of their regular season that year, too, of not great basketball, went on to win the 2022 national championship. So I think that is all to say that this is a far from finished story and book. And frankly, the story of last year's team should tell us that, the goal should be that continued growth. Whether it's the Sampson talked about in our first segment or whatever, uh, this is just so far from over and as disappointing and as critical. And we'll have time this week to be critical too. We got a lot of time between games here. Uh, sure, let's talk. We can keep talking about it. And the third segment today might be critical. We'll get through it as we go, depending on your cup of tea. But I do think though that like last last year's team would have struggled in this stretch too, and it's not fair to say like, well, they didn't lose a road game, so they wouldn't have lost. That's not necessarily the most fair comparison given the week that just was. And last year's team was allowed to get better. And last year's team had people hating on in January too. And last year's team had people hating on December too. And I think that this year's team, albeit different, the different schedule, I think this year's team is also allowed to grow. Now, that means they have to. That doesn't mean that they're going to. That means that they have to do it. Potential just means you ain't done it yet. But I do think there's something to all of that. Speaking of something to all of that, I think there's something to Mercy Miller and the way he's playing lately. And I know he had a lot of hype early. I think it's deserved now. We'll talk about that in the third segment. But first,
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. South Carolina rolled past Ole Miss 85-48 to clinch a share of the SEC regular season title and lock down the number 1 seed in the conference tournament. The Gamecocks extended their win streak over Ole Miss to 21 straight. UCLA dominated Wisconsin 80-60 to secure its first outright Big Ten regular season championship in program history. The Bruins improved to 27-1 overall and remain unbeaten in conference play. And number 12 TCU stormed back from a 13-point fourth quarter deficit to beat Iowa State 80-73. The Horned Frogs now sit alone atop the Big 12 standings and are 1 win away from clinching another regular season conference crown. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
today's show is also brought to you by Indeed sponsored jobs. Workplace chaos, deadline stacking up, inboxes overflowing. There's that one position you got to fill, and it's just sitting there open. When pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Indeed sponsored jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate just so happens to stumble across your post. Here's the stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, you can spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes. Less stress, less time, more results. We need the right person to cut through the chaos. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And listen to the show. Get $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support our show by saying that you heard about it on Indeed podcast. So Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a job. This is need to hire a job. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Park Rangers locked on Coogs here. And look, I think Mercy is awesome, and I want to stress this first part of my conversation in the third segment with that. And I think Chase McCarty is awesome too. The class of 2024 was very friendly to Houston in a lot of ways. Those two guys are great contributors and will be great Houston Cougars. I do think a lot of the early hype on Mercy Miller is because offense and points are tangible and quantifiable, and people like to see those things. I think it's also fun to watch mixtapes. You saw him had 60 points in a high school game. We see these kinds of things translate. There's obviously the fact where Mercy's father is a famous rapper. Like these things, I think led to a lot of people saying, we want more Mercy. And I would say early on in his time at Houston, that was more of the hype train. I think lately he's playing his way into yeah, he needs more clock. And I probably was almost too hesitant, if I'm being honest, in my own right, because I didn't want to jump on that bandwagon, right? Or what I want to kind of, give the deference or give benefit of the doubt. But Mercy's minutes and role continues to change and grow in a way that it feels like they frankly, if they're having trouble defending or having freshman young guy mistakes defending or whatever anyway, you got to get someone out there and get a basket. And Mercy is at least aggressive. If nothing else, Mercy is aggressive trying to score. He'll pull it when it triggers open. He'll attack the rim. He'll get downhill. And he maybe isn't the smoothest in the weaving kind of stuff that Houston likes to run and had success running for a decade plus at this point. It does feel like, though, that Mercy is at least aggressive enough to make something. I think the biggest shift, though, for me has been he started to do more of those junkyard dog type of roles, right? Mercy has done a lot better job of getting after rebounds and getting after loose balls and getting up in guys' stuff on defense and kind of, sliding over and help side. He still misses in a 18-minute stretch, 4 rotations. Like, I'm not saying he's perfect. I am saying that I think when the offense has stalled out as much as it has the last 2, 3 weeks, that sometimes you got to kind of, you know, giveth and taketh away by putting him out there a little bit more, it feels like. Now, I do think, too, the interesting thing has been earlier in the season when there were other guys playing well, I would say, well, whose minutes are he taking? What minutes are you? Minutes are a zero-sum resource, right? There's only so many you can play in a game, and if you're going to give some to Mercy, some have to come away from someone else. And I think earlier in the season, when Emmanuel Sharp was scoring at a much higher rate, and Miles Uzan was doing a lot of the defending, and then Kingston was kind of running the show, you were like, okay, which guard could it be? But now with Emmanuel kind of becoming more of a defensive-minded player, and honestly, it's kind of hurt his own scoring for whatever that's worth. You kind of need to find a way to make up that scoring elsewhere. And I don't know if that means in for Emmanuel or in for Milos. I don't think he starts. I don't mean to say Mercy should start over either of those guys. I do think, though, you're going to start to see him playing more early minutes. And I'm frankly a guy that in February, I would probably rather not change my starting lineup and just put Mercy in at the 17-minute mark instead and just kind of keep some continuity for the sake of continuity at the late February point, right? But I do think, though, that you're going to see more Mercy coming into these things because of that aggression. And again, frankly, because you're making a couple mistakes anyway, you might as well have it with the guy that's going to be aggressive on offense. Now, Chase offers interesting difference to me, too, because he's playing a little out of position. He's playing a stretch 4. He's probably really more of a 3. Doesn't quite have the handle of a 3 yet. Also, the hand injury, right? So there's some of that. But he's doing some scrappy stuff to get in the game more, and I really liked. I think they need to practice it more. I think that much was visible on a couple rotations defensively, but I really liked the lineup with Cenac at the center and McCarty at the 4, and the offensive versatility that offers you. I think the challenging difference is going to be that's no longer going to be the same kind of offense it is when it's JoJo Tugler or Khalifa Sacco at the 5, right? Because Chris offers different things, and McCarty can spot up in corners. And so I think it opens up the lane for a lot more driving. I think you can see Kingston get downhill, Milos can get downhill, Mayo get down and end those actions more in that 5-out look with Cenac at the 5, McCarty at the 4. And then, you can give that as a wild card kind of thing for stretches of the game, make them prepare for it, make them get ready for it. And then you can hopefully blitz them with it for a few minutes and call the dogs off, because that will be that will be a unit that needs to fly around defensively, to say the least. But at the same time, that the offense won't be the same kinds of handoffs and back cuts and stuff like that in the weaving action they've been getting into. It'll frankly be a lot more traditional pops and backside options, right? And so we'll see how much of that you can really install at this point. I think truthfully, they probably installed an offense assuming Tugger would play a lot more minutes per game than he's been able to. And that's been a disappointment this season, right? Is that he cannot seem to stay on the floor. It's a vocal disappointment from everyone associated. Bro, I don't think I'm trained confident in saying everyone wants to see JoJo play more minutes. He just keeps getting dinged with these dumb fouls. Now, as far as which one is more likely to happen, more Mercy or more Chase, I think it's going to be more Mercy. And I think truthfully, the deal there will be because he's doing some of these junkyard dog type things, you're going to see him take more of where the minutes were going to Isaiah Harwell or Ramon Walker, who both had many less minutes against Kansas than you might have thought in a double-digit loss. I think you're going to start to see those minutes kind of move over to Mercy. When you're talking about minutes being a zero-sum game, right? Like that's where I think they're going to come from. Maybe 2 or 3 from Emmanuel, 2 or 3 from Milos, but the bulk of the gain of Mercy's minutes, I think, will come from those other bench guys as he becomes your real bench wing. Kind of the same way Emmanuel was a couple years ago, right? If you remember early in Emmanuel's career coming off the bench, he'd come in and shoot a few threes and try and take a charge and whatever. Right? Those kinds of minutes, I think, are going to be where you see Mercy. But I can't wait to talk more about this with you this week. We're also going to be talking some NFL Combine stuff because Houston's got a couple guys there. So we got to make sure we talk about them, give them their praises. Spoiler for the Everyday All Access members, we kind of hinted some of that already today. So go check that out as well. Locked on Coogs Prime. Remember the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.